Let's start this video by clarifying the title. What I want to evaluate here is how much is each weapon inspired by the ancient civilization's technology and how advanced they are overall. We're not only going to rate their mechanical complexity, but also just how ingenious some of these weapons are in terms of creativity and design, both when it comes to their capabilities and their ergonomics. I'm also going to add a bit of a disclaimer. I don't know crap about physics, so this video is going to be me mostly talking out of my ass. Let's begin. Greatsword. Now, when I first thought of Greatsword for this tier list, I thought I was going to rank it quite low, but it turns out that Greatsword actually has some interesting designs for what is basically a huge butcher's knife. The first thing that I noticed is that even the bone Greatswords have this cool little detail on the handle. And some basic versions of this weapon also have this retractable spikes mechanism, which is also quite cool. When you unsheath the greatsword, you can see how the very grip extends. This allows the hunter to have not only a better grip, but also a better torque, which is the twisting motion applied to an object with respect to a chosen point, in this case, the grip. In other words, the grip is really well made in order to swing this thing around. The greatsword is so massive and heavy that it literally drags the hunter around when they swing the weapon. And to swing a weapon like this, you need as much support to your grip as possible. This is something that we can see in particularly big or long swords of our history. Bigger swords really needed to have a rather long grip and a well-crafted pommel as a counterweight. Otherwise, how else do you think the hunters can lift this thing and keep it straight towards the monster? That is crazy strength, but it's also well supported by the weapon's design. So, because of all of these small details, I will put the greatsword in B tier. Basically, a big chunky edge with some degree of mechanical ingenuity. Gunlance. Gunlance is, without a doubt, quite the advanced weapon in terms of mechanical engineering. Even the story hypes up the craftsmanship behind the Gunlance. Thanks to this story in Monster Hunter Wilds, we have some evidence suggesting that the ancient civilization heavily relied on monster psychology to inspire their designs, to the point that they even started to create their own versions of the monsters that we know in-game as the Guardians. Thanks to this interaction between Gemma and Werner, we know that the wyvern's fire was designed in order to recreate the way that actual wyverns condense and release energy. This design principle is known in our world as biomimetics, a type of design that tries to emulate elements present in nature. With a weapon like this, we have to consider some technological advancements that we also have in our world, like gunpowder. That said, it does seem that whatever fuel they use in the Monster Hunter universe might not quite be the same, and in that regard I cannot make many theories, but it does make me wonder just what exactly are Devil's Flight chemical components? On the other hand, here on Earth we would probably think that the Gunlance is a pretty poor design choice, but when you are as strong as a hunter, the bulkiness of the weapon doesn't really matter. With a retractable lance, the ability to do shelling, using drill-like projectiles called wormstakes, and an explosive blowtorch mechanism known as the Wyvern Blast, the Gunlance has so many technological components that really make you wonder just how does all of that fit into this one cannon? Because of all the gadgets and the access to pretty much gunpowder, it would be wrong to put Gunlance anywhere else but at the top of A tier. Sword and shield. Straight to D tier. You have a kitchen knife and a pot lid. That's it. No technological, mechanical, nothing. Let's move on. Switch axe. One of the morphing weapons. Just by that alone, I already get the impression that this must have been designed by the ancient civilization. The most complicated part of making a morphing weapon is not so much the design to fit two weapons into one, but to make it in a way that all the moving parts are sturdy enough to withstand a lot of punishment without having the mechanisms of the weapon compromised. The amazing thing about the switch axe is that it works incredibly well while cutting through bone, flesh and scales, and as far as we know, it never gets jammed, unless you mismanage your sword gauge. But to top it all off, the incorporation of the so-called files allows this weapon to take things into the next level. It is obviously hard to explain what kind of technobabble makes the switch axe store energy to create the explosions that we see when we reach amped sword mode. But we cannot deny that it basically becomes a form of plasma blade. I mean, it's not for nothing that the sword part of this weapon has true mind's eye at all times. which means that no matter how sturdy the parts of the monsters that you're hitting can be, this weapon will never bounce off. Not only that, but this is one of the weapons that can truly make the use of elements shine, since its signature moves, zero-sum discharge and full release slash, can create literal blasts of energy. I think that when we start to get close to the use of volatile energies such as these, at this level, we can safely say that the Switch Axe can easily step into the S tier. Hunting Horn. It was actually quite difficult to classify Hunting Horn in this tier list. There are elements of this weapon that are clearly inspired by tribal themes, especially the bone versions of it, but it can also be quite similar to a bagpipe sometimes. Wild's Hunting Horn gave us something that should have been in the game a long time ago, and that is a saxophone-shaped hunting horn. So my problem is that to make pretty much any instrument, you need to have a pretty good understanding of physics and how sound resonates in different materials. In the case of the hunting horn, it seems that the weapon also has some mechanisms to play the different notes, pretty much like what happens with a trumpet or a saxophone. With this in mind, I actually think that the design of the hunting horn is quite complex, and it combines elements of both primal and advanced technologies, all the while making it so incredibly resilient in order to keep working properly even with all the punishment it can take by slapping monsters around. For all of those reasons, this weapon goes on the top of B tier by a large margin. Dual blades. Oh, so now we have two kitchen knives. Great! It does have some mystique similar to the longsword, but in the end, its appeal is thanks to the hunter's prowess. And you can argue that Demon Mode is like a martial arts school the hunters train in order to use dual blades, but aside from that, not much technological elements to its design. Sadly, this weapon also goes into D tier. I am going to put Heavy Bowgun and Light Bowgun in the same category. This is because, even when they have their differences, I think they follow very similar principles. The Bowguns remind me of a type of assault rifle that has a grenade launcher attached to it. Very much like modern-day guns, it is very likely that the mechanical components of Bowguns are an amalgamation of small parts and gadgets that work together to activate the many different mechanisms behind their firepower. Wilds introduce some really cool concepts with the animations to the attachable gadgets that will increase your firepower temporarily. This, together with the fact that you have multiple types of ammunition at your disposal, makes the Bowguns pretty advanced in terms of technology. That said, one of them seems to be a bit more complex than the other. The Wyvern Fire counter modifier of the Heavy Bowgun is a gadget that looks more intricate than anything else that I've seen in Monster Hunter so far. It is a cylinder-shaped gadget capable of creating blasts powerful enough to push back and topple attacking monsters, all the while leaving the hunter unscathed. Just look at the way that the small pieces are blown away when you activate this thing. It really feels like every time you fire one of these, you're burning thousands of Zenny. Truly the most American weapon. So for these reasons, I have put both weapons on A tier, with Heavy Bowgun slightly above. Lance. Lance has some degree of mechanical ingenuity, and it is well complemented with the hunter's natural ability to find the best way of wielding a weapon. The mechanism behind the lance is pretty simple. You have a grip that can extend for better handling, and the lance itself also sticks out for better reach and poking ability. What I really like about the lance is the grip. It extends to the point that the hunter can not only use their hand, but their entire arm to get a better hold of it, using the armpit as a point of support. This is the only way that they can keep such an elongated object pointing forwards like that. So clearly, there was a very smart design choice behind the lance. The metallurgy behind the shield is probably a great quality since it can take pretty much any kind of punishment, but it is not a particularly complex design. B tier for the lance. Insect Glaive. Insect Glaive is really difficult to evaluate for me. I know that there are some mechanical components to it, but how? Just how did they make it so that you can communicate with insects is beyond me, which is why it will no doubt be high on the list. Now, let's get over what I do understand. The one place where you can notice how the propulsion system works is in the Monster Hunter 4 cinematic trailer. We can see that at the tip of the glaive there's this tube that seems to be blowing pressurized air in order to help the hunter vault. And when we check this in game, we can see that some glaives have this very same mechanism. There's also versions that have the spear tip incorporated as a moving mechanical part, and some don't. I actually don't like this design too much. I think that if you look at examples, such as the Chatacabra glaive, you'll notice that the spear tip, the thing that you use to attack, is attached to the pole by a single screw. Doesn't look very safe. I think that one wrong move and you could end up without a blade to fight with. But anyways, the complicated thing about this weapon is on the other end of the stick. It would seem that this is the part of the glaive that is in charge of controlling the kinsect's movements. But how exactly do you communicate with your kinsect by using this method is really something that I cannot wrap my head around. That said, I do have a theory, and that would be pheromones. There are some moves of the glaive that allow you to mark monsters in order to make the kinsect attack it on its own. These attacks always leave these dust particles puffing around. Even the projectile attacks leaves a trail of these particles, and you can see how it also leaves a cloud on the surface it impacts, signaling the mark on the monster. It's just a matter of the kinsect following these particles, and that could explain how this more or less works. Now, about the commands to make it fly, this one I think is a bit complicated, but my best guess is that insect glaive users have probably learned some things from bees. When one member of the colony wants to guide other bees to a potential source of pollen, they have to do these dance-like moves in order to tell the other bees where to go. So, in the case of the insect glaive, I think that the way that you're giving your kinsect commands is by following a similar principle, waving your glaive around in a specific pattern, making these very unique sounds in order to signal your kinsect, hey, fly that way. Because of all of these elements and just how extremely complicated it must have been to discover how to have this symbiotic relationship with kinsects, Insect Glaive is not only a marvel of engineering, but also an incredible feat in biomimetics, a design principle that we mentioned for the Gunlance. No, but seriously though, look up biomimetics, it's really cool. Thus, Glaive earns its place in the S tier, bow. In our history, bows are one of the earliest mechanical weapons invented by humanity. Usually depicted in media as the weapon choice of agile but slender characters, however, bows actually require the user to be quite strong in order to use them. When you pull the string of a bow, you have to fight against the tension created between the wooden components of the bow and the string itself, both usually made of very sturdy, yet very flexible materials. The bow in the Monster Hunter universe does not seem like a complex or technologically advanced weapon, until you look at the details. Especially the Wild's version, since it has added a new component, the tracer arrow. But first, let's look at the bow itself. Its design is clearly trying to do something that we have done to modern day bows. What you see here is a compound bow. It has a series of pulleys and other mechanisms that not only make it easier to string, but it also makes it so that maintaining the strong position doesn't require nearly half as much strength from the user as you would need with a traditional bow. It seems that the Monster Hunter bow tries to follow this same principle, and you can see it in the different joints and pulleys that are present in the basic bow. Not only that, but this version of the bow also has its interesting gadgets. There's a small flask right next to the arrow rest with a few strands poking out of it. This is where the coatings are applied. The tip of the arrow always grazes these strands, getting coated with different effects. Overall, a simple yet effective design to apply coatings. One of the most popular moves, the Dragon Piercer, shoots an arrow with a fuel propulsion system and an explosive device attached to the tip. Similar arrows can be found in the Arc Shot move, where many explosive arrows are shot to the sky and then fall onto the target. And then we have Tracer Arrow, a device that allows your following attacks to have heat-seeking properties, increasing your accuracy substantially. My only nitpick about the bow is the way that it folds when the hunter puts it away, because that means that all the force applied when stringing the bow is then being placed on this one single screw that is keeping the bow unfolded during combat. And if I were using a bow with that design, I would be having some serious anxiety issues. But that's just me. That said, I think that Tracer Arrow alone has made the bow climb quite some ranks in this tier list, since the technology behind it must be quite intricate and complex. If I were making this tier list during the 5th gen of Monster Hunter, this weapon wouldn't be very high. However, in this case, bow actually makes it to the A tier, right between the Bowgun siblings. Hammer. Hammer, I'm afraid, is in the lowest end of the tier list. The design doesn't really have any particular mechanical component, it's just a big glove. Now, I do feel like Hammer is probably a good testament of how far humanity has come since it started hunting monsters, because this is literally the OG hunting tool. The very first hammers in the Monster Hunter universe must have been just a thick-ass monster bone. And as such, not very advanced, right? At least in the case of Sword and Shield or Dual Blades, you get to apply some degree of blacksmithing or metallurgy into their design. But Hammer? Not even that is necessary. So, to the bottom of D tier with you. For some reason I know Hammer mains will take pride in this. Anyway. Longsword. Much of what I said about the Greatsword can be applied to the Longsword, except for the retractable spikes. The only mechanical part of this weapon is the grip, which extends a little bit when you unsheath it. I will also give props to the design of the scabbard, since it was made so that you can unsheath it without much difficulty even for a big weapon like this. If you pay attention to the scabbard, it doesn't completely cover the sword. The part that is around the back of the edge has this long opening that would make the sword easier to unsheath. This allows the hunters to have pretty easy access to their weapon and also to sheathing it as well. This can be seen after performing some of your combos. I do have a bit of a nitpick here, because just how the fuck are they doing the special sheath? It makes no sense, just how is the sword getting into the scabbard here? But anyways, that's besides the point. Now, I think that the appeal and mystique of the longsword is that it tries to play into the fantasy of martial arts and secret techniques, which is why you have names like Spirit Slash or EI Slash. So even when they are one of the more stylish weapons, when it comes to their design with regards to the ancient civilization and technology, it goes into the C tier. Charge Blade. Oh, Charge Blade. You are everything the steampunk community wants and more. The ultimate Swiss Army knife with defensive capabilities in Sword and Shield mode and extreme destructive potential when morphing into Axe mode. All the while going back and forth between these two modes seamlessly. But at the core of what is already a marvel of mechanical engineering lies a much more complex, almost sci-fi system that empowers this weapon beyond anything we've seen in Monster Hunter. Charge Blade has at its disposal several files that can be loaded with energy, and much like Switch Axe, the sword part of the weapon can accumulate energy by landing attacks on the monsters. This energy is then stored and repurposed for many different enhancements for the weapon. Just how? How have they managed to create a weapon that can harness this power in such a controlled manner? The most amazing part of it is that you can hear the mechanisms at work with every move you make, steam and fire energy being released with each swing and impact. But that is not all. The energy stored in this weapon can release destructive shockwaves of kinetic or elemental energy known as the super amped elemental discharge. Blasts so powerful that can even stun a monster. To have a weapon that is capable of creating what is basically plasma explosions is really a sight to behold in the Monster Hunter universe. But that is not the only reason why Charge Blade is so high above every other weapon. While Gunlance might be imitating something like a Rathalos Fire Breath, what exactly is Charge Blade imitating? The more I think about it, the more I find similarities between Charge Blade and Arc Belt. Both store energy with their attacks, and they are both able to release it in huge energy blasts. Even the animation has similarities. You can see the cracks starting to open in the ground before the blasts happen in Arc Belt's special attack. And as for SAD, the energy ripples through the ground moments before each file explosion. In every sense, Charge Blade is the epitome of the ancient civilization's designs. It takes inspiration from monsters and it combines it with different scientific principles to make it a true marvel of technology and biomimetics. And for that, it is at the top of the list. And there you have it. This has been the technology tier list for the Monster Hunter weapons. Is it scientifically accurate? The fuck it is! But hey, if I'm wrong on some of the concepts that I presented, that means that you, the viewer, get to tell me how they actually work and give me more detail as to why one weapon should be higher or lower in the tier list. I'm looking forward to your comments because I actually like to learn about this kind of stuff. Anyway, that's all for this video. I hope you guys had some fun and enjoyed it. I would really appreciate it if you could do any of the things shown in these stickers. And as always, my name is Sun, and until next time.